The most expensive mistake executives make is believing trust belongs to the company instead of the people protecting it. Cold rain hammered against the towering glass windows of Northbridge Global's Manhattan headquarters, while gray February clouds buried the skyline beneath heavy winter fog, rolling over the Hudson River below. Inside the executive integration suite on the 52nd floor, more than 40 attorneys, analysts, healthcare consultants, and institutional board representatives gathered beneath dim recessed lighting surrounding a polished black conference table stretching nearly the entire length of the room. Across 3 giant wall screens glowing pale blue against the dark wood-paneled walls, executives from Virilia Medical Systems and Horizon Quantum Health appeared remotely from Chicago, Boston, and London, while legal teams prepared final execution approval for the largest healthcare technology merger either company had attempted in decades. $3 billion waited inside the final governance binders stacked neatly before every executive seated beneath the cold conference lighting. Outside the windows, rain streaked across Manhattan's skyline while helicopters drifted slowly through low gray clouds above the river. Inside the room, nobody smiled much anymore. Billion-dollar mergers lose excitement during the final hours before execution. At that stage, everyone understands one procedural failure can destroy years of negotiations overnight. I sat quietly near the far end of the conference table reviewing continuity certification summaries, while younger analysts whispered beside glowing laptops displaying integration timelines and compliance structures across dozens of healthcare networks nationwide. 27 years inside enterprise merger governance had taught me something newer executives rarely understand until consequences become public. Companies do not collapse because contracts fail. They collapse because trust disappears faster than leadership notices it leaving. Across the room, Vanessa Cole stood confidently beside the presentation monitors beneath soft blue screen light reflecting against her tailored ivory blazer and dark executive slacks. At 42, Northbridge Global's new chief executive officer represented everything investors usually loved immediately. Media polished, aggressive, modern, brilliant during interviews, obsessed with executive visibility and transformation language that sounded powerful during earnings calls. Unfortunately, enterprise healthcare mergers require something less glamorous than charisma. Stability. Today marks a revolutionary transition in integrated healthcare infrastructure. Vanessa announced smoothly toward the giant wall screens while acquisition projections illuminated the conference suite around her. Several board representatives nodded carefully, while legal departments continued reviewing execution summaries beneath the dim lighting. Across the London screen, however, Horizon Quantum Health senior governance attorneys remained unusually quiet. Experienced legal teams always notice tension first, because they understand institutional confidence operates emotionally long before contracts become enforceable legally. Vanessa continued speaking confidently, while rain rattled softly against the skyscraper glass surrounding the conference suite high above Manhattan. As part of Northbridge's modernization strategy, she continued, we are also restructuring legacy oversight positions moving forward into the post-merger phase. There it was. Around the conference table, several senior analysts slowly stopped typing. One compliance attorney lowered his glasses quietly beneath the pale monitor glow. Across the wall screens, executives from Horizon Quantum exchanged quick, unreadable glances beneath soft London office lighting. Vanessa folded her hands calmly beside the glowing presentation displays. Effective immediately following today's execution review, Evelyn Hayes will be transitioning out of Northbridge leadership as part of our next-generation executive structure. Silence swallowed the room completely. Not confusion, not surprise. The kind of silence people create when they suddenly realize someone important just made a very expensive mistake publicly. I closed the final governance binder carefully while rain rolled down the towering windows overlooking the dark Hudson River far below Manhattan's skyline. Vanessa smiled confidently toward the screens without noticing the atmosphere inside the room changing around her. Younger executives often mistake quietness for agreement. Across the wall monitors, one older attorney from Horizon Quantum slowly removed his glasses before speaking carefully into the microphone. Chief Executive Officer Cole, he said calmly beneath the soft London lighting, could Northbridge clarify Continuity Protocol 14 before execution proceeds? Vanessa's expression tightened almost invisibly beneath the pale conference lighting. The matter is administrative only, she answered smoothly. Execution authority remains fully intact. The attorney remains silent for several seconds before replying again. Respectfully, our board requires confirmation from Ms. Hayes directly before signatures continue. Around the conference suite, nobody moved afterward. Outside the windows, rain hammered harder against the glass while Manhattan disappeared beneath winter fog beyond the river below. Then for the first time during the entire merger broadcast, Vanessa Cole stopped smiling. Rain continued striking the towering glass walls of Northbridge Global, long after the merger broadcast entered emergency suspension beneath cold recessed lighting and exhausted silence across the executive integration suite overlooking Lower Manhattan. Nobody left the conference room immediately after Horizon Quantum requested direct confirmation from Evelyn Hayes before signatures continued. Around the polished black conference table, younger analysts stared downward toward glowing laptop screens while legal departments quietly reopened governance binders they clearly had not reviewed carefully before today. Across the giant wall displays, Horizon Quantum executives remained connected from London and Chicago beneath soft office lighting while institutional attorneys exchanged unreadable glances through muted microphones and whispered conversations. Vanessa Cole stood beside the presentation monitors with one hand folded tightly against her tablet, while pale blue merger projections reflected across the dark conference room walls behind her. For the first time since becoming Northbridge's chief executive officer, she no longer controlled the emotional atmosphere inside the room. Continuity Protocol 14 is an internal governance formality, Vanessa repeated carefully toward the screens. One older attorney from Horizon Quantum leaned slightly forward beneath the London office lighting. Then formal clarification should be simple, he replied calmly. Silence settled again beneath the low hum of ventilation systems and distant thunder rolling across Manhattan beyond the skyscraper windows. I closed the final certification binder quietly while rain streaked silver against the glass overlooking the Hudson River far below. Around the conference table, several senior compliance officers already understood the problem becoming visible in real time. Continuity Protocol 14 did not protect paperwork. It protected institutional trust during executive transition instability, and Northbridge had just destabilized the person the merger architecture depended on publicly during final execution review. Around 8:30 that evening, the merger broadcast officially adjourned without signatures for the first time in nearly 11 months of negotiations. Publicly, Northbridge released a brief statement describing the delay as additional governance coordination. Privately, panic spread through the executive floors beneath glowing conference room lights, untouched catering trays, and exhausted attorneys carrying compliance binders between offices overlooking the rain-covered skyline. Inside the primary legal review suite shortly after 9 o'clock, Vanessa entered beside Northbridge's general counsel, while emergency governance teams projected continuity documentation across massive wall screens glowing pale white beneath the dim office lighting. Tell me exactly why Horizon Quantum stopped execution, Vanessa demanded sharply. One senior compliance attorney removed his glasses slowly before answering. Because Continuity Protocol 14 links institutional merger certification to strategic integration oversight. Vanessa frowned impatiently. Meaning? The attorney hesitated only briefly. Meaning Evelyn Hayes was designated as lead continuity authority across post-merger stabilization. Silence swallowed the room instantly. Around the conference table, several exhausted legal teams lowered their eyes toward the documentation scattered beneath fluorescent lighting, because everyone suddenly understood what executives ignored for years. Evelyn Hayes had not been processing integration paperwork. She had been the institutional safeguard preventing governance instability during one of the largest healthcare mergers on Wall Street. Meanwhile, across the Hudson River, warm apartment light reflected softly against dark hardwood floors, while Manhattan shimmered beneath rain and winter fog beyond the windows overlooking the water. My phone vibrated steadily across the dining table beside several merger binders and untouched tea growing cold beneath soft kitchen lighting. Recruiters, board advisors, enterprise attorneys. Funny how corporations spend decades reducing women into background operational support, until billions of dollars suddenly stop moving without them. Around 10:15, a private call arrived from Horizon Quantum's senior governance director in London. His tone remained calm but noticeably more personal now. "Mrs. Hayes," he said carefully, Our board would appreciate clarification regarding continuity oversight before any future execution activity resumes. Outside the windows, ferries moved slowly through rain and fog across the dark Hudson River, while Manhattan disappeared behind low gray clouds. I remained quiet for several seconds before answering softly. Continuity Protocol 14 was designed to protect institutional confidence during leadership instability. Across the line, silence followed immediately. Then the director asked the question everyone inside Northbridge was suddenly terrified to answer. And does your removal compromise that protection? I looked toward the glowing Manhattan skyline across the water before replying calmly. The protocol is functioning exactly the way it was built to function. Thursday morning arrived beneath heavy gray skies while freezing rain drifted across Manhattan and reflected against the towering glass walls of Northbridge Global, overlooking the dark Hudson River below. Inside the executive floors, however, nobody cared about the weather anymore. Overnight legal reviews transformed quiet concern into full institutional panic beneath glowing conference room lights, scattered governance binders, untouched coffee cups, and exhausted attorneys carrying merger documentation between offices since before sunrise. The $3 billion healthcare technology merger remained completely frozen, while Horizon Quantum's board refused resuming execution discussions until continuity oversight concerns received formal clarification directly involving Evelyn Hayes. Around 7:15 that morning, Northbridge's general counsel entered the primary governance suite carrying a thick black binder beneath one arm, while Vanessa Cole stood near the giant windows overlooking Manhattan's rain-covered skyline below. Several board representatives already occupied seats around the polished conference table, beneath cold recessed lighting while merger risk assessments glowed across massive wall displays surrounding the room. Nobody spoke immediately because everyone sensed the atmosphere had already shifted beyond executive public relations language and investor talking points. The general counsel finally opened the binder carefully beneath the pale conference lighting. We completed the overnight continuity review. Vanessa folded her arms tightly. And the attorney looked directly toward her now. Continuity Protocol 14 designates Evelyn Hayes as lead institutional stabilization authority across all post-merger integration phases. Silence swallowed the room instantly while rain streaked against the giant windows surrounding the executive suite. One older board member leaned forward slowly beneath the dim lighting. Explain that clearly. The attorney hesitated only briefly. The merger's enforceability structure depends on active continuity oversight through executive transition periods. Vanessa's expression hardened. Meaning? The general counsel lowered her glasses carefully onto the table. Meaning Evelyn Hayes' removal during live execution review may have destabilized the governance certification Horizon Quantum required before signatures. Across the room, nobody moved afterward. Younger analysts quietly lowered their eyes toward laptops, while several board directors exchanged long silent glances over scattered compliance reports. Deep down, every experienced attorney inside the building understood the terrifying truth becoming impossible to ignore now. Evelyn Hayes had not been maintaining procedural paperwork. She had been protecting institutional trust itself during one of the most fragile healthcare consolidations in the country. Meanwhile, across the Hudson River, soft morning light reflected faintly through rain-covered apartment windows while ferries moved slowly across dark water, beneath the gray Manhattan skyline beyond. Warm tea rested untouched beside several merger binders spread neatly across my dining table, while incoming calls continued vibrating across the polished wood surface every few minutes. Recruiters, enterprise governance advisors, competing healthcare firms. Funny how corporations spend decades treating women like operational infrastructure, until billions of dollars suddenly stop moving without them. Around 9 o'clock, Horizon Quantum's Executive Governance Committee requested an emergency private video conference. Their London legal division appeared first beneath soft office lighting, while senior healthcare compliance officers joined remotely from Chicago and Boston across multiple glowing screens. One board advisor spoke carefully after several moments of silence. Mrs. Hayes, our board needs to understand whether Continuity Protocol 14 can remain stable under current leadership conditions. Outside the apartment windows, freezing rain drifted steadily across the Hudson River, while Manhattan disappeared beneath thick gray clouds and low winter fog. I remained calm because emotional reactions never improve governance instability. The protocol was designed after the St. Vincent integration crisis 12 years ago, I answered quietly. Several executives on the screens exchanged quick glances immediately because they remembered exactly what happened during that collapse. One unstable leadership transition nearly destroyed a national healthcare merger before continuity safeguards stabilized institutional trust again. Horizon Quantum's lead attorney leaned closer toward the camera beneath pale London office lighting. And are those safeguards currently intact? Silence settled softly through the call while rain tapped gently against the windows overlooking the river. Then I answered with complete honesty. Not under leadership willing to destabilize continuity publicly during execution. Across Manhattan, meanwhile, Northbridge Global's Investor Relations Department received notification that multiple institutional shareholders requested emergency governance clarification meetings before markets opened Friday morning. Inside the executive suite overlooking the storm-covered skyline, one older board director finally whispered the sentence nobody wanted becoming public. The merger trusted Evelyn Hayes more than it trusted Northbridge. By Thursday evening, Northbridge Global no longer resembled the confident healthcare conglomerate investors admired across Manhattan's financial district only days earlier. The towering headquarters overlooking the Hudson River still glowed brightly beneath freezing rain and low winter clouds. But inside the executive floors, tension spread through every conference room, hallway, and legal office beneath exhausted faces and flickering monitor screens displaying suspended merger timelines. The $3 billion healthcare merger had officially entered indefinite governance review, while institutional shareholders quietly demanded explanations regarding continuity failures spreading rapidly through Wall Street healthcare circles. Around 6 o'clock, Vanessa Cole entered the executive governance suite carrying investor briefing reports beneath one arm, while several board members reviewed emergency compliance summaries around the polished black conference table beneath cold recessed lighting. Rain reflected silver against the skyscraper windows surrounding the room, while Manhattan's skyline shimmered gray beyond the dark river below. Nobody greeted Vanessa when she entered. That alone unsettled her more than the merger freeze itself. One older board director finally looked up from the reports spread across the table. How many enterprise integrations depended directly on Evelyn Hayes' continuity oversight? Vanessa hesitated briefly before answering. I assumed governance teams handled the operational details. Across the room, Northbridge's general counsel slowly closed one of the thick merger binders beneath the pale conference lighting. That assumption may cost this company significantly more than the Horizon Quantum merger. Silence settled heavily across the executive suite, because every person present already understood the truth becoming impossible to hide now. Evelyn Hayes had spent 27 years quietly becoming the institutional safeguard enterprise healthcare clients trusted most during unstable integrations, while newer executives focused on branding strategies, executive optics, and investor presentations. Meanwhile, across the Hudson River, warm apartment light reflected softly against dark hardwood floors, while archived merger summaries covered the dining table beneath quiet evening lighting. Each binder represented crises most executives barely remembered anymore. Regional hospital consolidations in Dallas. Pharmaceutical compliance integrations in Boston. Emergency restructuring during the St. Vincent governance collapse 12 years earlier. During every unstable transition, enterprise boards requested the same thing privately behind closed doors. Can Evelyn Hayes oversee continuity certification? Funny how corporations spend decades reducing women into invisible operational support, while billion-dollar institutions quietly trust them more than executive leadership itself. Around 7:30 that evening, my phone vibrated again. This time from Mercer Alliance Partners, one of Northbridge's largest healthcare competitors headquartered in Chicago. The managing partner's tone remained professional, but unusually direct. Several institutional healthcare boards specifically associate your oversight with integration stability, he explained carefully. Of course they did. Trust built quietly over decades does not disappear because one executive decides optics matter more than continuity. Across Manhattan, meanwhile, Northbridge's internal legal teams continued reviewing archived integration records beneath fluorescent lighting, while rain hammered against the giant windows surrounding the executive floors. Shortly before 9 o'clock, one younger compliance analyst discovered something especially damaging buried inside previous merger documentation. Evelyn Hayes's continuity oversight structures had quietly stabilized for major healthcare integrations during periods of executive leadership instability over the past 15 years. Inside the legal review suite, several exhausted attorneys exchanged long silent glances beneath the pale monitor glow after reading the archived reports. One finally whispered the sentence nobody inside Northbridge wanted repeated publicly. She was the reason institutional boards trusted these mergers surviving leadership changes. Upstairs, meanwhile, investors had already started requesting emergency governance clarification calls while financial media outlets quietly circulated rumors regarding instability surrounding Northbridge's suspended healthcare merger. The company still stood physically. The lights still glowed above Manhattan's skyline. But beneath the polished branding campaigns and expensive executive speeches, something fundamental had started breaking apart. People were no longer questioning Evelyn Hayes's value. They were questioning whether Northbridge Global ever truly understood it at all. Friday morning arrived beneath pale gray skies while freezing rain drifted across Manhattan and reflected against the dark glass towers surrounding Northbridge Global's headquarters overlooking the Hudson River. Inside the company, however, the atmosphere had shifted from panic into quiet deterioration beneath exhausted legal teams, emergency governance calls, and conference rooms filled with executives pretending stability still existed. The $3 billion healthcare merger remained indefinitely suspended, while institutional shareholders demanded formal explanations regarding continuity failures spreading through healthcare finance circles faster than Northbridge leadership could contain them. Around 8:30 that morning, several younger analysts arrived to discover two senior integration associates had quietly resigned overnight. Neither departure referenced compensation. Neither mentioned workload. Both resignation letters cited leadership instability during governance execution. Inside the executive governance suite overlooking the rain-covered skyline, Northbridge's board assembled again beneath dim recessed lighting, while updated investor risk assessments glowed across giant wall displays surrounding the polished conference table. Vanessa Cole sat quietly this time near the far end of the room while attorneys reviewed emergency compliance summaries beside untouched coffee cups and stacks of merger binders. Nobody asked Vanessa for strategic direction anymore. That silence unsettled her more than the suspended merger itself. One board member finally spoke while rain tapped softly against the skyscraper windows overlooking Lower Manhattan. Horizon Quantum's board has postponed all execution timelines indefinitely. Another director slid a printed investor report across the table beneath the cold lighting. And 3 additional healthcare partners requested continuity clarification reviews this morning. Vanessa stared downward toward the paperwork without speaking. For the first time since the live merger broadcast, she appeared less like a confident executive leader and more like someone slowly realizing institutional trust cannot be rebuilt through branding language once credibility leaves publicly. Meanwhile, across the Hudson River, weak winter sunlight briefly pushed through heavy clouds while I sat inside a quiet waterfront restaurant in Hoboken reviewing governance structures with senior partners from Mercer Alliance Partners beneath warm amber lighting and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan beyond the dark water. Unlike Northbridge executives, Mercer leadership did not waste time discussing executive optics or modernization campaigns. They asked about post-merger stabilization risk, healthcare integration psychology, institutional continuity, under executive transition pressure, real enterprise questions. One managing partner folded his hands calmly across the polished table. Several healthcare boards privately associate your oversight with merger stability, he observed quietly. I almost smiled. Institutional trust forms slowly, I answered while ferries moved across the river outside the windows. Most companies notice that only after they destabilize it. Across Manhattan, meanwhile, Northbridge's internal situation continued worsening beneath glowing conference room lights and mounting investor pressure. Shortly after noon, financial media outlets began quietly reporting rumors regarding governance instability surrounding the suspended merger. No public scandal yet. No names. But Wall Street and healthcare finance both understand coded language extremely well. Leadership continuity concerns. Integration governance instability. Institutional oversight disruption. Investors hear those phrases and immediately recognize structural weakness beneath executive messaging. Around 2 o'clock, Northbridge's general counsel privately informed the board that Horizon Quantum executives specifically requested Evelyn Hayes's involvement before any future merger discussions resumed. The room reportedly fell completely silent afterward beneath pale fluorescent lighting and scattered compliance reports. One older board director finally removed his glasses slowly before speaking. The merger partners trust Evelyn Hayes more than they trust this company. Nobody argued because the truth had become impossible to ignore now. Evelyn Hayes was no longer the executive Northbridge publicly removed during a live merger broadcast. She had become the standard institutional healthcare boards measured leadership stability against. And every hour passing without her quietly pushed billions of dollars farther away from Northbridge Global's towering Manhattan headquarters and closer toward wherever Evelyn Hayes decided building trust next. By Monday morning, the rain had finally stopped over Manhattan, but the atmosphere inside Northbridge Global remained colder than the gray winter skyline surrounding the financial district. News regarding the suspended healthcare merger had spread quietly through enterprise finance and hospital governance circles all weekend while investors, legal advisors, and institutional healthcare boards waited for Northbridge leadership to explain why one of the largest healthcare consolidations in the country suddenly entered governance paralysis days before execution. Inside the executive floors overlooking the Hudson River, conference rooms glowed beneath fluorescent lighting. While exhausted attorneys continued reviewing continuity documentation, nobody outside compliance divisions respected before Evelyn Hayes walked away. Around 8 o'clock, Northbridge's board assembled again inside the executive governance suite, while pale morning light reflected against the towering skyscraper windows surrounding the room. Vanessa Cole entered carrying updated investor reports beneath one arm, but this time nobody looked toward her for reassurance. The room had already shifted emotionally beyond recovery. One board director spoke before Vanessa even reached her chair. Horizon Quantum formally declined our revised execution proposal. Silence settled across the polished conference table, while governance summaries glowed across massive wall displays beneath cold recessed lighting. Another director slid a printed document forward beneath the pale conference lighting. They requested future merger discussions occur through Mercer Alliance partners instead. Vanessa froze completely. Across the room, Northbridge's general counsel removed her glasses slowly while several younger associates exchanged exhausted glances over laptop screens. Everyone understood the meaning immediately. Horizon Quantum had not simply paused negotiations. They had started moving the merger away from Northbridge entirely. Meanwhile, across the Hudson River, sunlight reflected softly against the water outside Mercer Alliance's temporary Manhattan strategy offices where warm amber lighting replaced the cold fluorescent atmosphere consuming Northbridge's executive floors. Inside the conference suite overlooking Lower Manhattan, I reviewed revised merger stabilization structures beside Mercer's senior healthcare integration partners while Horizon Quantum's governance division joined remotely from London and Chicago across glowing screens mounted against dark wood-paneled walls. Compliance teams discussed continuity safeguards calmly while institutional advisors reviewed revised healthcare integration timelines with quiet confidence. No panique. No scrambling. Just operational stability functioning correctly again. One Horizon Quantum executive finally smiled faintly through the screen. This process feels significantly more secure already. That sentence alone explained why Northbridge had started collapsing internally. Institutional healthcare boards do not remain loyal to corporate branding. They remain loyal to the people making billion-dollar integrations feel stable during uncertainty. Around noon, Northbridge's investor relations department received notice that two major institutional healthcare shareholders planned reducing exposure until governance confidence improved publicly. Financial media outlets amplified the story rapidly across Wall Street and healthcare finance networks throughout the afternoon. Leadership instability. Governance disruption. Continuity oversight failures. The language remained carefully professional, but the damage had already become visible publicly now. Inside Northbridge headquarters, several senior integration directors quietly updated resumes beneath pale office lighting, while executive elevators moved almost silently between floors once crowded with expansion speeches and modernization presentations. Shortly before 3 o'clock, Vanessa Cole finally contacted me directly for the first time since the merger broadcast. Her voice sounded lower now. Slower. Like someone learning too late that executive authority cannot force trust remaining after credibility leaves publicly. Evelyn, she said carefully through the phone, Horizon Quantum is restructuring the merger through Mercer Alliance. I remained calm while sunlight reflected across the Hudson River outside the office windows. Institutional boards prefer continuity during instability, I answered quietly. Silence stretched between us for several seconds before Vanessa spoke again. I underestimated your role here. Outside the windows, ferries moved slowly through the cold afternoon water, while Manhattan shimmered beneath pale winter sunlight beyond the skyline. No, irraplia sufli. You underestimated what 27 years of trust looks like when leadership finally needs it. Wednesday evening settled over Manhattan beneath pale winter clouds, while the towering glass buildings surrounding the financial district reflected gold across the Hudson River under fading sunset light. Inside Northbridge Global, however, the atmosphere had become painfully quiet beneath dim executive lighting, half-empty conference rooms, and legal teams avoiding eye contact in elevators once crowded with aggressive modernization speeches and expansion forecasts. 5 days earlier, Vanessa Cole still believed removing Evelyn Hayes during a live merger broadcast represented decisive leadership. Now the company's largest healthcare merger had shifted toward a rival firm, while investors questioned executive competence publicly across financial media networks and healthcare governance forums. Around 6:30 that evening, Northbridge's board convened inside the executive governance suite overlooking Lower Manhattan, while updated investor exposure reports glowed across massive wall displays beneath cold recessed lighting. Vanessa sat alone near the far end of the polished conference table, while several directors reviewed resignation notices from senior integration specialists who quietly departed during the previous 72 hours. Nobody discussed modernization strategies anymore. Nobody mentioned branding transformation either. The room had evolved beyond those conversations completely. One older board member finally folded his hands together beneath the pale conference lighting. Horizon Quantum finalized preliminary transition discussions with Mercer Alliance this afternoon. Vanessa lowered her eyes toward the reports scattered across the table. Across the room, Northbridge's general counsel spoke carefully while snow mixed lightly with rain against the skyscraper windows overlooking the darkening river below. They specifically cited continuity confidence and governance stability. That phrase settled heavily through the executive suite because everyone understood what it truly meant now. Horizon Quantum no longer viewed Northbridge Global as institutionally reliable. The company had publicly humiliated the one executive healthcare boards associated with operational trust itself. Meanwhile, across the Hudson River, warm light filled Mercer Alliance's Manhattan offices where calm conversations replaced the exhausted panic consuming Northbridge's executive floors. Inside a conference suite overlooking the skyline, I reviewed revised healthcare integration structures beside Horizon Quantum's governance teams, while snow drifted softly beyond the windows facing Lower Manhattan. One younger compliance attorney smiled faintly while organizing execution summaries across the polished conference table. This process finally feels stable again, she admitted quietly. I nodded once because institutional healthcare mergers always reveal the emotional condition of leadership eventually. Chaos inside executive teams spreads into billion-dollar integrations much faster than executives realize. Around 8 o'clock that evening, Northbridge's internal governance investigation formally concluded its preliminary review regarding the failed merger execution. The findings remained confidential, but rumors spread rapidly through Manhattan healthcare finance circles before midnight. Vanessa Cole reportedly ignored continuity advisories from legal divisions during the live merger broadcast. Several board members privately questioned whether executive vanity caused avoidable institutional damage worth billions in long-term healthcare trust exposure. Inside Northbridge headquarters, younger analysts whispered quietly near elevators and darkened workstations, while snow reflected silver against the giant windows surrounding the executive floors. For the first time in years, people inside the company stopped talking about growth. They started talking about survival instead. Shortly before 9:30, Vanessa Cole arrived outside Mercer Alliance's Manhattan offices alone beneath cold snow and glowing streetlights reflecting across wet sidewalks near the Hudson River. She looked exhausted now, older somehow after only 1 week. The receptionist guided her silently toward the private conference suite overlooking the skyline, while snow drifted softly beyond the glass walls surrounding the room. When I entered several minutes later, Vanessa remained standing beside the windows watching ferries move slowly across the dark river beneath Manhattan's glowing lights. "The board is reviewing my leadership authority," she admitted quietly without turning around. I remained calm while warm office light reflected softly across the polished conference table between us. "Executives survive failed mergers all the time," I answered quietly. Vanessa finally faced me beneath the dim lighting. "Then why did this destroy everything?" Outside the windows, snow mixed with rain across the skyline while Manhattan shimmered cold and distant beyond the river. "Because," I said softly, "you believed authority came from the title on your office door." Silence settled between us while the city glowed beyond the glass. But healthcare boards trusted the person protecting stability after leadership failed. 2 weeks later, Manhattan stood beneath clear winter skies while pale sunlight reflected across the Hudson River and illuminated the towering financial district where Northbridge Global once projected absolute confidence through polished branding campaigns and billion-dollar expansion promises. The company still occupied the same glass headquarters overlooking Lower Manhattan, but inside the executive floors, the atmosphere had changed permanently beneath dim conference lighting, half-empty offices, and quiet conversations replacing the aggressive certainty that once defined Vanessa Cole's leadership culture. The $3 billion healthcare merger no longer belonged to Northbridge. Horizon Quantum formally transferred Integration Execution Authority to Mercer Alliance Partners after institutional healthcare boards unanimously approved revised continuity oversight structures led by Evelyn Hayes. Wall Street financial media described the transition carefully as a governance stabilization decision. Inside enterprise healthcare circles, however, everyone understood the truth more clearly. Institutional trust followed Evelyn Hayes out of Northbridge Global the moment leadership humiliated her publicly during the live merger broadcast. Around 9 o'clock that morning, Mercer Alliance executives gathered inside a newly renovated integration suite, overlooking the Hudson River, where warm amber lighting reflected against polished walnut conference tables and floor-to-ceiling windows framing Manhattan's skyline beneath bright winter sunlight. Horizon Quantum's legal teams joined remotely from London and Chicago, while compliance officers reviewed final execution documentation beneath calm voices and relaxed expressions completely absent from Northbridge's collapsing executive floors weeks earlier. Nobody rushed. Nobody panicked. Stability had returned because leadership no longer treated governance continuity like disposable operational support. One senior healthcare advisor from Chicago finally smiled while reviewing the finalized execution structure displayed across the wall screens. "This feels like institutional leadership again," he admitted quietly. Across the table, several attorneys nodded immediately because experienced healthcare governance professionals recognize emotional stability long before investors notice it publicly. Meanwhile, inside Northbridge Global, emergency board meetings continued beneath cold fluorescent lighting, while shareholder pressure intensified daily. Vanessa Cole remained technically employed, but most strategic authority had already shifted toward temporary governance oversight committees, established after investors demanded accountability reviews regarding the failed merger collapse. Several senior executives resigned quietly during the previous week, while enterprise healthcare clients postponed unrelated negotiations until Northbridge demonstrated institutional stability again. Reputation damage spread silently through healthcare finance. Recovery takes years. Shortly after noon, Vanessa stood alone beside the giant windows inside her executive office overlooking the bright Manhattan skyline while snow melted slowly across rooftops and ferries crossed the cold river below. The office still looked expensive. The title on the glass door still existed. But executive authority without institutional trust eventually becomes decorative. A soft knock interrupted the silence before Northbridge's general counsel entered carrying updated investor summaries beneath one arm. "The board approved Mercer Alliance's revised execution announcement this morning," she explained carefully. Vanessa stared toward the skyline without responding immediately. "So it is over," she said quietly after several seconds. The attorney hesitated before answering honestly. "The merger?" "Yes." Silence settled heavily across the office while sunlight reflected against the glass towers surrounding Lower Manhattan. Then Vanessa finally asked the question that mattered more than the merger itself now. "When did they stop trusting me?" The general counsel looked toward the river below before replying softly. Probably the moment they realized you removed the one person making leadership transitions feels safe. Across the Hudson meanwhile, final healthcare integration documents waited neatly across Mercer Alliance's conference tables beneath warm afternoon lighting, while institutional advisors prepared public execution approval announcements. I stood quietly beside the windows overlooking Manhattan, as sunlight reflected across the river separating the city's financial towers from the calmer shoreline beyond. 27 years inside enterprise healthcare governance had taught me something executives rarely understand until consequences become irreversible. Billion-dollar mergers are never held together by contracts alone. They survive because people trust someone protecting stability when leadership eventually fails. And once that trust leaves a company publicly, no executive title in Manhattan can force it returning. By early April, spring sunlight finally returned to Manhattan after months of cold rain, gray skies, and tense winter mornings that once hung heavily over Northbridge Global's collapsing executive floors. Cherry blossoms had started blooming along parts of the Hudson River walkway while ferries crossed calm blue water beneath warmer afternoon light reflecting against the city's towering glass skyline. From the outside, Northbridge still looked powerful. The same headquarters remained standing over Lower Manhattan. The same corporate logos still glowed above executive entrances. Quarterly reports still described strategic restructuring initiatives and leadership recalibration efforts beneath polished investor language carefully designed to soften institutional embarrassment. But inside healthcare governance circles, the company's reputation had changed permanently. People no longer discussed Northbridge as the future of healthcare integration. They discussed it as a warning about what happens when executive ego destabilizes institutional trust publicly. Meanwhile, across the river, Mercer Alliance's integration headquarters operated with the calm consistency experienced enterprise boards prefer during billion-dollar transitions. The $3 billion healthcare merger officially finalized under revised continuity structures, led by Evelyn Hayes, while Horizon Quantum executives publicly praised the merger's exceptional governance stability and disciplined execution framework. Funny how stability becomes visible only after companies lose the people quietly maintaining it for decades. One warm Thursday evening, soft spring light reflected gold across the Hudson River, while Manhattan shimmered peacefully beneath clear skies beyond the water. Inside a quiet waterfront restaurant overlooking the skyline, several younger healthcare attorneys from Mercer Alliance celebrated the merger's successful completion beneath warm amber lighting and soft jazz drifting through the dining room. Conversation remained relaxed now. No emergency governance calls. No investor panique. No executives scrambling to protect public image while institutional trust collapsed behind conference room doors. Around the table, one younger integration associate looked toward me carefully before asking a question I already knew would eventually come. When Vanessa Cole fired you during the live merger broadcast, he asked softly, did you already know the merger would collapse? Outside the restaurant windows, ferries moved slowly across the darkening river beneath Manhattan's glowing skyline while spring wind brushed softly against the waterfront. I smiled faintly before answering because the truth mattered more than revenge ever did. No, I said quietly. I knew the merger would become unstable. Several younger attorneys remained silent afterward, because they finally understood something most executives learned too late. Billion-dollar mergers are not protected by contracts alone. They survive because institutional leaders trust someone capable of keeping stability alive after pressure, fear, and executive politics start pulling organizations apart. Across Manhattan, meanwhile, Vanessa Cole reportedly prepared her formal resignation package after Northbridge's board completed its governance accountability review weeks earlier. No public scandal followed. No dramatic collapse appeared on financial television. Corporate consequences rarely happen loudly at that level. They happen quietly through disappearing influence, lost credibility, and institutional confidence that never fully returns. Later that evening, I walked alone beside the Hudson River, while warm spring air drifted through the waterfront beneath glowing city lights reflecting softly across the water. Manhattan looked beautiful from there. Calm, distant, almost peaceful enough to forget how quickly powerful institutions can destabilize themselves when leadership confuses visibility with trust. I stopped briefly beside the railing while ferries crossed slowly beneath the illuminated skyline beyond the river. 27 years earlier, an older healthcare governance advisor once told me something during my first major integration crisis. The most valuable people inside an organization, he said, are usually the ones nobody notices until stability disappears. Back then, I thought he was speaking about operations management. Standing beside the Hudson River years later beneath Manhattan's glowing skyline, I finally understood what he truly meant. Invisible leadership is still leadership. Quiet authority is still authority. And trust built patiently across decades will always outlive executive titles borrowed temporarily through office doors and shareholder applause. Because in the end, the $3 billion merger was never destroyed by legal paperwork or governance protocols. It collapsed the moment leadership publicly humiliated the woman institutional trust was quietly built around all along.